Perfect. So we already covered costs and people, Robert. So the third main point for today's video is impact. Impact on operation.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
So something that you mentioned to me during the preparation of this podcast is true opportunity cost. Give me a little bit more about TCO.
Yeah, so that's really the why we do the FATs. So
Mhm,
the FAT is just a enabler for your operations, because at the
mhm,
end of the day, and it's more of an enabler to allow you to produce goods and services. So we're talking goods, consumable goods or durable goods, for this pharma, food and beverage, right? And so, what we're talking about here is the cost that you plan versus your real cost that is a variance. And your plan costs is how you run your business, how you schedule your operations, your margins for profit and revenue. Oftentimes what happens, and most technical people, which, I'm one, also a business owner and strategist, is we don't see beyond the technical in looking at the overall business operation. So maintenance costs. So what happens is if it didn't run well, or it had issues with the line or equipment had issues in the FAT, we documented it. We said, whatever, I won't make up a story, but there's some variability in one of the four areas, right? And we didn't have a mitigation plan, or we just needed to be in production. Let me give you the real life scenario. The line was late, the equipment was late out of an FAT, because 50%, and probably want to get into this, at least 50% of FATs are unsuccessful at the first try. And I could pull data from the census data, but from my experience, being in the industry for 30 years, working for multinational corporations and OEMs, 50% of the times you fail an FAT or it was not ready. And what that meant was several things. So what happens is if you get it into operations and we didn't resolve the challenge, or we said, okay, we can fix it in operations, and we're pressed up against the clock because we've got a timeline to hit our consumer and our customer store shelf with product. So that's driving us. So they're going to do a store shelf reset on every certain part of the year. They do a reset. We need our product on the shelf. We need it there strategically. And if we just move it, get it there, and we run the line, and we make the product launch, what happens is your operations is stuck with unfavorable variable costs. And long term, you won't be able to produce more volume on that line because it's suffering to produce at the percentage you asked it to do.
yes.
So instead of producing at 95%, it's producing at 60% efficiency. So it's
Mhm,
basically capacity you can't utilize to operate your business. So we talked about, again, the opportunity cost, TCO, and maintenance. Having equipment that doesn't perform, that has a lot of maintenance intervention with people costs in your inventory, having to have parts on consignment or in your own stores for tax implications. You got money sitting on your shelf, you don't need to have it sitting there. So in an FAT, companies like yours and mine, we help organizations look at these things before they make the purchase, so they are not living with this decapacitated operation and margins that are not favorable for them. The other thing I'm going to say is morale. And what happens typically, and we're going to go back to people, when you have a production line that doesn't produce very well, the morale goes down. Because remember, that team was engaged, they were invigorated, they were energized for this new piece of equipment that had the best technology for them. There are all the bells and whistles, but in reality, it hadn't produced to the level that they expected. And over time, that morale starts to go down, and your performance follows that down and down. And then we try to implement all these different procedures and tactics to get it to run better, that asset or line. But what's missing is, did we adequately in the pre-FAT and the FAT uncover the variability that could happen and enable solutions? And if we didn't do it because we had to hit the short store shelves with product, can we now come back and do that in production mode? And typically what happens is most operations companies can't do it because they're busy making product. So hence companies like yours and mine can come in and help stop the bleeding and help them understand how to fix the problem and enable them to produce and bring down their TCO. So I
Of
gave you a
course.
lot here in this little segue,
No,
but
yeah.
this is the real important part here.
Yes.
It's not because the FAT is $50,000 if it's a European FAT or 20 or American. That's irrelevant. What's the real challenge is it impacting your ability to sell your product? And is your morale going down? And are you able to thrive? And that's why we want to do a great FAT and a prefab.
Exactly. That for me is the impact is not just related to cost. Impact is more related to the operational standpoint, like you mentioned, and we back to the people skill, and obviously the pre-FIT. So for me, impact will be driven directly by the people skills and your pre-FIT, and not necessarily by the cost. Okay, because like you mentioned, could be something here cost X, and then the other one is cost Y, but you don't have you don't know the impact on operational standpoint if you don't have a good implementation process, which we are going to be talking about on part
Sure.
2 of
Exactly.
this FIT. But below impact, and before I go to the last main point, is what about branding? When you have a factory acceptance test, it's because you decide to buy a new equipment. And when you decide to buy a new equipment, could be to improve your operational process or introduce a new product, a new packaging. So
Exactly.
what is the impact on branding having a good factory acceptance test?
This is competition. It's all about, America's built on competition, being leaders of the free world, being examples, employing people, empowering homes, people to live the American dream. Yeah, that's all great. The impact is we need to always be first on shelf. That's why America is great, is because we're always striving to push the envelope, right? To just be a little bit more creative and courageous. Well, in doing that, you have to have the time to be able to do that. Meaning, so in production, if the time is not available because we have this lagging production line that doesn't produce at the FAT requirement, it's not allowing the business brand, marketing and sales to innovate and renovate on a timely schedule. And it can hamper, and it goes back to the census data I was talking about earlier. It's not directly correlated. That was about investments, but you can translate that into operations to say that it's also a derivative or an input to your operations that you can't produce the volume you have planned. And furthermore, Wilberto, what I've seen is there's that feedback loop that we need to have in our operations to the external OEMs so that they understand that asset has some challenges and how can we both work together to fix it. And what's missing is the collaboration. You talked about that earlier. You talked about collaboration of now is installed, how you translate that back into the production facility, whether it's pharma or food and beverage. I think the missing component is also OEMs. So if we want to be better as a food producer or a commodity producer, we need our OEMs to be better. So we need to collaborate with them. They need to be proactive on what's going on and why. So there's a feedback loop missing that we can't innovate fast enough, and brands are they're really trying to squeeze the launch schedule from a capital investment, say 18 months in the old paradigm in food and beverage, to 12 months or less. How are we going to do that if we're already today, we're still at $8 billion of wasted money on capital expenditures? How are we going to minimize that if we're going to move faster? Yeah. So brands are looking to be creative. We all want the stuff that our marketing and sales teams produce, whether it's new packaging, sustainable materials that are a byproduct of it, plant-based foods, or healthier choices to meet the governmental requirements, or just being good citizens of society and of the earth. How are we going to do that if we can't get our production systems to be more efficient? So
yeah, exactly. So for me, in a simple way to mention all the great information that you just say now is factory acceptance test will help you to improve your quality of your brand or your product, and will help you to have a better distribution process so you can increase the sale. Because if you have a better OEE, you will have more product out of the door, right?
Exactly.